Mm. All right. Great. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Those here, thanks for joining us. Those online, thank you too as well for tuning in. Um, Let me see. Let me open in prayer and then we can get to the other little tidbits we have. Father, Yahweh, great and mighty you are. There is none like you. Father, we thank you for another day. We thank you for another Shabbat. And we do delight to enter into this time, Father, because we want to grow closer to you, hear from you, to be able to understand you in a deeper way and strengthen our relationship to you, Father. And as the days get, as the days draw nearer to when you return, Father, we know that we're going to need your assistance. We're going to need your Spirit. Father, help us to understand your words and be empowered and by them. We thank you again for the redemption we find in your Son, Yahshua. Amen. Well, again, thanks for all of you coming here today and those online. Livingmessiah.com is the website, and you can go there to donate, and that is greatly appreciated. And we thank you to all those who have been faithful to doing that, so we can able to do these many things with technology. Thanks, Ward, for the things I know he does. I don't completely understand them all the time, but he makes it work so you can actually hear me. So a thumbs up as well too. That would be great. I appreciate that. Now we do have a mic back there, so whatever comments or questions you may have, just raise your hand and we will make sure that mic comes to you. We just ask, be on point of what we're talking about. Let's not jump ahead of our text. That way we can all learn in the same manner. So as far as a review, this is going to be a unique review because I come across some other things that I'd like to share with you. And the other thoughts I had this week, I had mentioned this last week, history is never really clear-cut, with historical events. Usually there's more moving parts to any type of thing that's going on historically. And even if you read the history books, you read that there was other things behind and that come in and that are part of history, I guess. Again, I guess the simple thing, there's always more to the story. But in thinking about that, there is more in history. I'm sorry, I'm skipping around in my head here. And the other part, especially because we're studying the scriptures in the various languages that it was written in and came to through us. So there's more to understanding the text, and I'm going to be the first to tell you right off the bat, there is a lot there to understand the text, but I try to do it the best I can, but always be looking and trying to understand, especially I think when we start to understand more of the Hebraic, of the Hebrew behind our Messiah and behind the culture, that's where a lot of things will expand some more as well. So, that old saying, this is what I was thinking about, that old saying, the victors write history. I was just talking to a brother, and, there is a lot of truth to that, But I thought, that's kind of interesting in this sense, because I believe since our Creator, our Messiah says, they have been victory. They have victory over all of this. That's awesome, because whatever they're writing, their truth that they've given us, that's confidence that we have that's there. So I think that's just something to think about in that sense. So take comfort in the future regardless, because our Creator, our Messiah, have been victorious over one of our biggest enemies, and that is death. So know your source. Because remember, the accuser even knows the truth and slightly bumps it out of hand. So Here's the review that I was talking about that I wanted to get to. Okay. First, they led him, and we're talking about Yeshua right now, being led to trial right before his crucifixion. They first led him to Ananias, and I shared with you that Ananias was high priest about 10 years ago, but he wasn't high priest at this particular time. He owned the marketplace where Messiah overturned the tables. And all this is to give you a backdrop that's going behind all this, okay? So so Messiah overturned basically the tables of his marketplace, it seems like. And then ultimately, Messiah, Yeshua being delivered to him first, shows that he had still a lot of influence within the community or within Jerusalem religious structure, okay? Then we know he sent to Caiaphas, and I would suggest it seems like they shared the same type of household, because it didn't say he went right over to Caiaphas. Now Caiaphas, as you know, he is high priest at the time, but he's the son-in-law to Ananias. Okay? Then third, they took Yeshua to Pontius Pilate. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Now, remember, Pilate asked where Yeshua was from. Okay? This, I believe, is another possibility of this whole background and questioning. Possibly, Pilate might have realized that he could be speaking to a Jewish insurrectionist, okay? Asking where he was from. Because the other Gospels, I'll show you, say where he was from. He was from Galilee. And now Galilee was a place where a lot of these revolts were, what would you say, were planned out and came from, okay? So that raises a lot to Pilate as well when, he's from Galilee, okay? So what's going on? So this is what we read, I believe, last week, John 19. And the Yudim answered him, "We have a law, and according to the law, he ought to die, for he has made himself the son of Elohim." When we talked about that, there's no big deal about him in the Jewish law or in the Hebrew scriptures for anyone to say, "I am the son of God. I'm a child of the living Elohim," right? So when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid. So again, I put forth, he wasn't afraid of the God of Israel. He could care less. So where was maybe some more of this fear? Okay? So when Pilate heard this word, he was more afraid. And when he went back into the palace, he asked Yeshua, "Where are you from?" But Yeshua gave him no answer. Okay? That's how John reads. Okay? So in amongst this, keep that in mind. Fourth, he was handed over to Herodes or Antipas. Okay? John doesn't record this and doesn't mention it. But I think it's valuable to understand that aspect of what's happening as well. So, if we go to Luke 23, but they were insisting, saying, "He stirs up the people," speaking of Yeshua, stirs up the people, teaching through all Judea, beginning from Galilee unto this place. And then Pilate heard of Galilee, and he asked if the man were a Galilean. And when he learned that he was under the authority of Herodes, Antipas, okay, he sent him to Herodes or Antipas, who was also in Jerusalem in those days, because they came down because of the feast, not so much to celebrate the feast, but to be a present, because remember, this is the feast of Passover, one of the 3 pilgrim feasts, okay? And it is said for all the males to come to Jerusalem at these 3 particular times. So what that meant is Jerusalem was probably 100 times fuller than it was at the time. So you do want some of you do want a Roman presence, so you want some of the leadership from Rome who've been appointed to the territories to be there to show We're not going to have any of that Egyptian thing that happened to you guys that you're going to think you're going to be set free. Okay, so and remember, that was in the background of all the Jewish mindset as well. Passover was, it was the blood of the lamb, but it was also the time that Elohim freed us from the tyranny from Pharaoh. Okay, so anyhow, in seeing Yeshua, I say Herodes or Antipas, rejoiced greatly. For a long time he wished to see him because he had heard much about him and was anticipating to see some miracles done by him. And was questioning him with many words, but he gave him no answer. Okay? So there was this idea, it was known that Yeshua was from the Galilee area, that being Antipas's place. So you can see right off the bat, Herod, I would say, it's like, I can get rid of this headache. I'll send him over to Antipas, all right? Because I don't have any rule in that territory. I send him up there. So the Gospel of Luke states that he was first brought before Pontius Pilate for this trial. Pilate was the governor of Rome. We talked about that. The governor of Rome governor of Rome in Judea. Okay, but Yeshua, that's where he was arrested. That's why he was turned over to Pilate, and that's we know that. So, but Antipas, her jurisdiction was up in Galilee, a territory, like I said, that's known for this type of uprising type thing, but it also, we all know, that is where Messiah's, I think you could say 90% of his ministry was there, up in the Galilee area, in Samaria, up in there. It wasn't down in Jerusalem. The only time we really hear about him in Jerusalem is the time of the feasts that he comes down, okay? But here's what's interesting. Herodes, this Antipas guy that we're talking about, okay? Guess who his father was, if you don't know already? Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great he was nuts, okay? He was a crazy guy, but he was great at building stuff. He's known for even bringing in and redoing the temple and all that, okay? He was king of Judea during the birth of Yeshua, during the birth of the Messiah, right? Okay? Because at that time, he was granted to be king by the Roman Senate, not only in the Judean area, but a larger territory, okay? And the surrounding territory. So King Herod the Great at that time. So he had these sons, and that's who Antipas is. He's one of those sons. Okay, so upon his death, the kingdom was divided amongst his sons. And his one son, I practice pronouncing this guy's name, Archelaus. Okay, he inherited the land of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, and then Herod Antipas had the Galilee area, okay? And Philip, Philip, the other son, he inherited the northeast of the Jordan area. Anyhow, it was divided up. But what happened after Herod the Great, because he ruled great, Rome seemed to like him and what he did, but when his sons took over, a lot of chaos happened, okay, when they inherited. So Augustus Caesar removed Archelaus from his position and his place in the territory, removed him from Judea area. All right, so he didn't have that position anymore. So what happened is, by that happening, that's where these other governors came in, and Pontius Pilate being one of the governors at the time. So there was this in some ways, people are saying maybe there's a friction, because we'll read that later on, Antipas and Pilate became friends, because at one point there was friction between them. And maybe a lot of it was because, he didn't get his dad's inheritance. He had a little grudge against Rome. And when that occurs, you hate whoever Rome puts in that position. So, that makes sense to me. So after the death of Herod the Great, Herodes Antipas, and you can read this in Luke as well, went to Rome. He tried to lobby it. The request was denied. Rome's decision was to install those types of governors, which Pilate was part of. So Herod's descendants, in place of, they didn't want any Herod's descendants in this particular section. So that seems to be what I saw with Antipas, or when I was reading, if I'm explaining it right, this resentment towards Rome in that decision. So right here, I'll continue. Let me see. Rome, and Luke continues here. And the priest and the scribe stood accusing him intensely, being Yeshua, and Herodes or Antipas, with his soldiers, made light of him, mocked him, dressed him in splendid robe, and sent him back to Pilate. So it seems like that's where he was enrobed with the robe and maybe the crown there. But then it says, on that day, Pilate and Herodes or Antipas became friends with each other. Okay, so you can read that in Luke. But here is something else that's even more interesting about Herodes or Antipas being up in the Galilee area. This is going to bring in another figure that's behind all this, or in the backdrop. We need to go to the book of Matthew for that. Here we read, at that time, Herodes or Antipas, the district ruler, heard a report about Yeshua. Okay? He heard about this Yeshua of Nazareth and said to his servants, "This is John the Immerser, John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead, and that is why those mighty, these mighty powers are at work in him." So at this time, he put John the Baptist to death. And then Yeshua's there, and it's like, okay, that's got to be a resurrection of John the Baptist with all these powers, okay, of what's been happening. For Herodes, or Antipas, had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison because Herodias, his wife, which was his brothers at the time, or there was some, no different than today. There was sneakiness going on, okay? And John the Baptist called it out on them. It's like, okay, that's wrong. You shouldn't have your brother's wife and such and such. Okay, so for John had said to him, "It is not right for you to have her." And wishing to kill him, he feared the crowd because they held him as a prophet. Okay? But Herodes or Antipas's birthday beginning, and we know the story, what happens. His wife at the time, his daughter comes in, dances. He's, "Whoa, that was great. What can I do for you, little one? I'll do this." And she talked to the mom, and the mom said, "Okay, I want John the Baptist's head because I don't like what he said about me." However, whatever John said, he really struck a chord. And ultimately, we know the story. John lost his head. So I'm just saying, so with Herodes coming part of this trial with Yeshua going on, you can see the background of the time it was going. How it was a small world. It was, and if you've been in Israel, it is a very small area. But even at this time, all the components, all these, I don't know if you. Players, all these people, what was behind the big story about Messiah and his trial, and I think that's important when we look at that whole background. So I wanted to share that with you, and you can do some more research, and you begin to see how the relationship to all these people was. behind Messiah's trial, which goes back to what I said in the beginning. We have to sometimes, there's more to the history than what we know. Even if you look at World War II's and all of even American history, there's always more than maybe what we have been told. You can go find it, but there's always more. And that, to me, that emphasizes more on maybe especially who we're looking at, being Yeshua, who he's part of the world, but he's not the world. And I think that's something, a good way of looking at that. And that's what we're told to do. You know, you're in the world, but don't be the world, right? So we'll continue. Yeshua answered, in John, Yeshua answered, you would, he's talking to Pilate here, you would possess no authority against me if it were not given to you above. And we talked a lot about that because that is so true just on the superficial level. Pilate didn't have any kind of power that if it wasn't given to him from Rome. But yet we know if we look deeper, that's a bigger statement because guess what, Pilate? If the creator of the universe wasn't allowing you to do what you are about to do, or anyone for that matter, it would not have come to pass. So there's deeper things in Messiah's words, but we have to understand just the simple part first. Because of this, he who delivered me to you is greater sin. And we talked about that. Because of this, both are at fault here, okay? So we can't just sit there and say, oh, it was the religious authorities. They played a part in it. Pilate played a part of it, okay? And ultimately, if we're fair with all this, why any of this has happened is because humanity has rejected him, okay? But it's interesting here, we also know that I had mentioned, so in some sense, it seems like Yeshua is on trial, but we are all those there, and we are on trial. Because at the end, the judge, how are they going to be judged in the end? How are all of us going to be judged in the end? And that's basically the book of John really emphasized that. And we talked about how Israel at one point had rejected the Creator and wanted a king like all the other nations. And think about that right now as we grow up. And it's like, I know we live in America. It's much better than probably a lot of other countries for sure. But even being where I'm at and seeing the stuff that we deal with humanity, okay, I'm just pointing the fingers back at all of us. It's like, no, I want His kingdom because it's got to make more sense. It's got to be more just, So we can't do that with our belief in Messiah. We have to make sure that is where we're at. And I believe Messiah proves that point. Because later on, at the end of this trial, what did he die for? All the accusations they brought against him, we know are lies. They knew were lies. All these accusations. So at the end of the day, he died for one thing and one thing only. And that being obedient to his Father. And being obedient to those same teachings that we have. So I know I jumped way ahead on that one there. So we continue 12. From then on, Pilate was seeking to release him, but the Yudim, or the Jews, shouted, saying, if you release this one, you are not Caesar's friend. See what they're doing? They're manipulating. And remember, too, I got to point out this again. It's one of my pet peeves. The Jews here at the time wasn't some big crowd coming out from everywhere. It was a specific little group, and I would suggest to you it seems to be the religious authorities and their friends that were there. It wasn't, to me, this, I know we saw movies, it seems like it's this big public display and all the Jews kill them. I don't think it happened that way. I think it was a small group that was here. Because the last thing the religious authorities wanted was any kind of big public thing going on. All that's going to do is make Yeshua more of a public figure to them. So the last thing they want to do is give him any credit. That's why they snuck at night to do this. Let's get this under the carpet here. So I don't see it as a big thing. That's my personal opinion, and I could be wrong, okay? But I want to tell you that for sure. So therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Yeshua out and sat down in the judgment seat at the place that is called pavement, but in Hebrew it's called Gabbatha, okay? And it was the preparation day of the Passover week, and about the 6th hour, and he said to the Yudim, the Jews, "See, your king." So what's going on here? Pilate's kind of getting snotty back to them because he was pigeonholed for what he was doing. This is, again, what I see was playing out. So he goes, "Here's your king," And it also covers Pilate's butt if it ever gets recorded and gets back to Caesar, what he did. He took down the king of the Jews, so he's covered politically in any manner there. So he's saving his butt too if things get out of hand, right? But they shouted, "Away, impale him." Pilate said to him, "I shall impale your king." The chief priests answer, "We have no king except Caesar." Wow, that's a very interesting wording there, okay? So you ultimately see the heart of those bringing Yeshua there to make such a statement because we wanted to get rid of this guy because he's going to mess it all up for us, what we have. I talked about that, so I don't want to repeat. In Mark, we have this. And at the festival, he released to them one prisoner whom they were asking. And there was one called Barabbas, chained with his fellow rebels who had committed murder in the uprising. So there was uprising. And I'm only bringing this out because I did mention to you, for me, it seems like the two that get crucified along with Messiah or Barabbas' friends who all played a part in it. Barabbas got out of it and his two friends didn't. That's just my thinking. Okay? But the other interesting thing here too is this is after the Exodus coming out and our Father putting forth all the examples for us, especially with the sacrificial system. On the simplest level, it's right here. The exchange of the innocent in place of the guilty. It's real simple. Yeshua, he did nothing wrong. They couldn't even prove it. But Barabbas, regardless, he killed somebody in an uprising. He's guilty. Whether it was a Roman soldier or not, that didn't matter. Ultimately, the innocent died for the guilty. As we continue in John, at that time, when he delivered him to them to be impaled, they took Yeshua and led him away. And bearing his stake, he went out to the so-called place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, okay, where they impaled him, and the two others with him, one on this side and one on that side, and Yeshua in the middle. And Pilate wrote a title too, and put it on a stake. And it was written, Yeshua of Nazareth, the sovereign of the Judeem, or the Jews. Many of the Jews therefore read this title, for the place where Yeshua was impaled was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Roman, which would, I think, be Latin. Okay? But, so, what we talked about before in the book of John, and that whole concept, okay? Bear your stake. Messiah made that comment before, okay? And he bore his stake. So I'm going to show you what we discussed of what that means. It means he took responsibility for himself. So when you say you're going to bear the stake of Messiah, basically what you need to know is you're going to take self-responsibility for yourself and walk out these commands. That is bearing the cross. That is bearing the stake of Messiah. And surely he did do that because he upheld all what his Father told him. He took responsibility and authority of who he was. Now, it might not ended up like we wanted, or, and that could be for any of us, but we are to bear our own authority and responsibility to uphold these commandments to the best of our ability. And if we fail, get up and continue. So here, I believe, with kind of what I was presenting, I believe Pilate got the last jab in at the Jewish leaders with the sign that he posted. Okay? I think there was a lot that was behind this. So possibly one way, when I was looking at this, and maybe many of you have come across this, possibly the one way to look at it is this. Pilate knew that the temple leaders were using the Son of God, okay, argument, to corner him into putting Yeshua to death. So in return, he flipped their manipulation back on them. Because you got to have to understand, Pilate's in a position, friction already with this little group of people, okay? And I know what they're doing to me right here, and they got me on a tough spot. He didn't see any reason to kill this guy. But yet, and I believe it was what he did here. He did this by the sign that he hung over Yeshua at his crucifixion. Here it is in the Hebrew. One of the ways the original text could appear is just like this, okay? And it's interesting how the other Gospels, they kind of mention it, but what do I have here? The other Gospels, Luke goes as far to say it was letters Greek and Roman. But that's only in the Greek. The Aramaic does not say that, meaning only John in the Aramaic, and ultimately I would say in the Greek, mentions these three names. Or they talk about the sign, but John goes a full distance on emphasizing this sign versus the other Gospels, okay? So John here lists the three. And the other thing I think that I had mentioned, maybe that's another thing to support that the author of John was more of an eyewitness than the other gospel writers. That John really knew some of the ins and outs of these things going on. And I mentioned some other things why that might be the case. But what we have here is an acrostic, okay? The first letters spell out a word. And this is in Hebrew, and I think other languages too, And remember, it's left to right, Yeshua, the Nazareth, and really would how you read what I have up on the board here, Yeshua the Nazareth and the King of Jews. That and, that vav, really does something there. It spells out the covenant name of the Creator, which is kind of interesting. Yeshua never claimed to be a king, right? He never claimed to say that I'm the king of the Jews, I'm the king of Israel. People called him the son of David, but there was a lot of sons of David if you really look at it in that sense. If they came from that lineage, they were a son of David in some sense, right? But I'm not saying that son of David does not hold the idea and concept of king, but he never said that. Because they've accused him of a lot of things. Now, the people may say one thing, but he didn't say that. Nathanael, in the beginning of John, is the only one that I found, and I could be wrong here, the only one that says, you, or Yeshua, you are king of Israel. He's the only one that proclaimed that. And he was from up in the Galilee area, too, which remember that some of this Galilee area was a hot spot for some of these revolts. And this is exactly where Messiah is ministering. I'm not saying he was any kind of building a revolt. It's just where he was at. And if that's the case, if you want to go there, well, yeah, he was from that place. He had his own. No, the way he revolted, if that's the right word to use, he showed us how to do it. So in the end, what I believe, they didn't want him to be a public scene. But because of the way they handled it and how, or whatever, it ended up being that way because Yeshua, he's outside the city gates for all people to see him. And up above, whether it had Yud-He, Vav-He on there, read that way or not, either way it says King of the Jews, and that's the last thing that the authorities, the religious authorities, wanted to happen. The last thing they wanted to happen is you and I sitting here right now talking about this prophet who we see as king, who we see as one of the greatest rabbis, bringing us back to the Father to obey these commandments and not the traditions of men, and not that he, so it's just crazy. And again, like I said, his actions, the only thing that he was guilty of that they could charge him with was obeying his father's law. That is it. So the chief priests of the Judeans said to Pilate, okay, this got them upset, one way or the other, however you want to look at it. Whether it was the Creator's name they didn't want written up there, or just the simple fact of what it said. The chief priests of the Judeans, the Jews, said to Pilate, do not write sovereign of the Jews, but he said, I am the sovereign of the Jews. Well, like I said, he didn't even say that. Even when Pilate asked him, are you a king? And he says, that's what you say. He never said, I'm king. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Oh, that's getting you a little edgy out there, your little manipulation you did on me. Live with it. And there's nothing you can do. It's hanging right there. Right? Then the soldiers, when they had impaled Yeshua, took his outer garments and made 4 parts to each soldier a part. And the inner garment, but the inner garment was without seam. So they said to each other, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it. Those it shall be, in order that the scriptures might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them. Not only did they just divide the garments, there's 2 things here, okay? They divided my garments among them, and they also cast lots as well. So that's kind of interesting how that's both there, not just one. They just divided the garments. No, they cast lots for one and divided on the other. The soldiers, therefore, indeed did this. Well, this sounds like this guy, whoever wrote John, they did this because, maybe I'm going to add, they did this because I was there and I saw it. And by this, the stake of Yeshua stood his mother. So his mother was right there, so it's not out of the question. This particular author was right there to testify this, right? And his mother's sister, Miriam, the wife of, I'm going to skip over that. Anyhow, Miriam from Magdala, okay? So like I said, you can see this upset the temple authorities, and maybe it was a twofold whammy, being king of the Jews and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh being written like that. Scriptures that might be fulfilled, that is, you can read a lot of that back in Psalms 22:18 specifically, and that's interesting. I'll let you guys do that. I didn't want to go down that path there. Then Yeshua, seeing his mother and the taught one whom he loved. There's something to me very interesting about that. But standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, see your son." And then the taught one, he said, "See your mother." And from that hour, that taught one took her to his own home. After this, Yeshua, knowing that all had been accomplished in order that the scriptures might be accomplished, said, "I thirst." A bowl of sour wine. A bowl of sour wine stood there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a hyssop, which is kind of interesting. And hyssop, by the way, that's the same stuff when they came out of Exodus, came out of Egypt during the Exodus story. Hyssop was used to get the blood and apply to the doorposts. So it's kind of interesting. Hyssop is popping up here. And they held it to his mouth. So then Yeshua took the sour wine. He said, "It has been accomplished." It is finished, maybe some of your translation. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. So time has really caught up on me here. So what we're going to do, and we're going to come back next week, I have highlighted here, "Woman, see your son." That really stood out to me. Behold your son. Woman, behold your son. Okay? And yes, I mean, just what's the simple level of what's happening, you can see he loved his mom. He wanted to make sure mom was going to be taken care of, right? But I always think, why does Messiah use particular words? Are they recorded for a particular reason? I tend to think so. So, what I did is, "Woman, see your son." With the backdrop of who Yeshua is and what we know his mission was and set out to accomplish. Next week, I'm going to present to you an idea that I see that there's more behind that wording. Woman. It wasn't mom, woman. See your son. And we know that that's how he addressed his mom. We can't get away from that. Don't ever try to go, "Woman," to your mother. It's not going to work, all right? But it was different context here. So I explored that. And the other thing, I haven't started yet, but I think we have to. Because it's saying it has been accomplished. What? Okay, what has been accomplished? And we all have our thoughts on that, and that's why we're here. But hey, let's review and maybe skim off a little things that we gathered and maybe add a little bit more to what has been accomplished. Yes, Bud?
And when it said the taught one, who are they talking about there as the taught one?
I have my own view, but I don't want to share that publicly because I can't exactly prove it. But one of the taught ones. If you do, for instance, at least right here, to whom he loved. If you looked at, and I'm not going to tell you who it is, but if you look at this particular whom he had loved, Messiah is referencing a particular follower. Because you can see in other scriptures it being applied to that particular person. So that's what I can say on it. Other than that, I'll just leave it be at that. So this is what I thought. We'd explore these coming up next. I don't know I know for at least the one, what has he accomplished? I think we're all going to be challenged. I know I'm going to be. I might not have all the perfect answers, but I think we need to address these things, especially as we grow closer to our Messiah and to our Father in heaven. So next week we'll come back and we'll start into that part of it. Yes, Barry?
And what about him?
And what about him?
One of the statements of the other taught ones. And what about him?
Peter said to him, "What about him, the one whom Messiah loved?" Yes, there's there's interesting things behind that whole concept, but that would be something I wouldn't want to share this way. Just share some of the little ironic little things about that apostle. But let's not get off base on, behold your son, because that's where we want to focus. And believe it or not, that will take us right back to the beginning book. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Father, Yahweh, great and mighty you are. We thank you for your words. We thank you for your faithfulness. Be with us, Father, and help us to understand and draw close to you, Father. Empower us with your Spirit so we can understand and be strong in choosing right from wrong, what is righteous and what is not. Just like your son, regardless, he stood there, Father, and he had complaints by everyone around him, even those who kind of liked him. But we need to do that and help us, Father, in these times. Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and we'll be back next week. Thanks again for all of you guys coming in.